I have several stories, but I'm going to do the ones that stand out the most. They're all dealing with what I personally believe is a raven mocker. I believe that because I'm Cherokee. It's a shapeshifter, and it has only been seen once in almost a decade worth of encounters. At least in a human form anyway. There isn't much information on them, but I know that they are usually invisible, and I've been told that they can take many forms. First, 3 stories all occurred while I was outside, near wooded areas after dark. For some reason, it likes to stay in the woods. Others are like dream attacks, and a few are extremely unusual animal encounters. These all take place starting when I was maybe around 11 or so, and continued on up until today. I'm currently 22. I apologize in advance if it's long. I'll try to include as much detail as possible. This first one happened at my grandmother's house. Me and my oldest cousin, Tristan, had decided to go outside after everyone else had gone to bed. We were out in the shed, talking and smoking a cigarette when I heard my grandmother call my name. I freaked out because I thought we were busted. I got even more freaked out because it sounded like it came from behind the shed, and we knew she was in the house, which was in front of us. Now, to finish this story, I'll have to tell you that my cousin is a hillbilly from up around Black Mountain. He was really into investigating things. I am Indian, and I was raised around old Indian folk. I knew there were some things that you should fear and respect, but most importantly, fear. So anyway, he wants to go check it out. Peer pressure is a hell of a drug. So, we went to look. We walked up towards the tree line, and out of nowhere, I heard one of my other cousins call me from ahead of us, in a thick patch of cane, on the swampy side of the woods. Then, my dad called me, followed shortly by my aunt, both of whom knew we were not even in the general vicinity of that house. This thing was literally mimicking a nice percentage of my family. At this point, I was really creeped out. I have crept up to within 5 feet of that patch of cane, and I'm still edging forward. Now, there's a tree just behind these bushes, and up about 15 feet there's a branch. That branch started shaking, and I heard the leaves rattle. When I looked up, I saw something falling from that branch. It almost looked like a large bird, but I didn't really get a good look at it. As soon as it landed, it sounded like something started running at us, head on through those bushes. If I had not experienced the events that happened up to this point, I'd have thought it was a bear charging toward us. It's the only logical answer. If you looked across the top of the cane, you could see the taller ones parting. This thing was big, fast, and really heavy. It looked like it was going to make one hell of an entrance, with a sound to match. The footsteps sounded heavy enough to be mistaken for a horse, but my ear said it was something running upright on 2 legs. Right before it got to the edge, it just stopped. We were too shook up to even move. We just stood there. When I finally regained mobility, I walked backwards all the way to the house. I didn't take my eyes off that tree line once. We got inside, and as soon as we closed the door, something hit it. Tristan opened it up to look, and there was nothing, so he closed it and locked it. We turned and started to walk away, and it happened again, but it hit harder this time. We looked at each other and went straight to the living room. We sat there in the darkness and did not move or say a word until the sun came up. I've lived my whole life, almost 30 years, in Arkansas. Being raised a son of the South, it should go without saying that I spent a considerable amount of time in our state's vast woodlands, hunting, camping, etc. So I never had any fear of the unknown. Deaths of the forest or whatever woodland creatures resided out there until about 4 years ago. When I was a child, my parents moved us from a small town of Poyen out to a small town about 40 miles south of Little Rock. Both of my parents worked full-time jobs in order to pay off our new house and a significant swath of land bordering my grandfather's land. So, through much of my early childhood and early school, later on, I would go on and spend much of my time with my grandpa while my parents got home. He was a sweet old man, kind of an old hippie. About once a week, he would ask me to go on a walk with him through the forest, and in a time before I had cable or Xbox, I would gladly agree. Anything to get me out of the house and my own bedroom. Every walk was the same. About a half-mile trip down a good work path, past a large pit at the end of a tree, and then turning me in at a trash line. We would go through some sandy marshes that were dry almost year-round, and eventually to a large oak tree and a hollowed knot growing on it about chest-high. When we got there, he would reach into his jacket pocket and pull out 3 or 4 eggs he would leave on the hollow. The first time I asked him why, he told me that before was a church on every corner, people used to live and die and pray in the forest. That the forest was more than just trees and squirrels, that it looked after people. All this sounded like religious nonsense. I had already had several head-butting arguments with my parents at this point over religion. Them being devout Baptists and I putting my faith more in a good Remington than some man in the clouds, I honestly never paid him much mind after that. I still accompanied him on his walks though, and just thought of him as some kooky old man who dropped too much acid in the 70s. Until about 4 years ago when he died. He left me his house and his land, and I moved in right quick, eager to make it out to that shitty little apartment I had ended up in some 45 miles away. My parents had split up and both moved to different places by then, so it was comforting on some level to go back to a place where I spent so much of my early life. In about a week's time after moving in, I had a good bit of trash to burn. Some of my stuff, but most of my grandpa's old junk he never got around to tossing out. It was mid-autumn by this point, but still way too hot during the day to have a fire, so I waited till about dusk, grabbed the last few bags of trash and some freezer-burned food, and made my way to the pit. I had the fire blazing after a couple of minutes. The last slivers of sunlight had dropped below the forest, making the only light the tall flickering flames dancing off around the trees. I sat down on an old stump and lit a cigarette as I watched the flames. I was so deeply enthralled in the orange and red dance, I had forgotten to throw the last load of trash in the pit. So, I stood and kicked the 2 bags into the flame and began unwrapping all the freezer-burned ground beef, peas, and steaks, throwing their contents into the tree line and the plastic into the flames. It wasn't until I threw the last steak, a big frosty T-bone, besides a corpse of smooth, white bark birch trees that something happened. I heard something low and rumbling. Not quite a growl, but far from being a comforting sound. Then, one of the branches of one of the smaller birches began to bend, almost like it was falling in slow motion. Then, extended out, and I saw from the firelight with a horror that I had previously thought were long little branches were gnarled, impossibly long fingers ending in savage points. They sunk into the cold meat, and something half stepped out of the cover of the trees. It was hunched down and thin, but I could tell it would be a good foot over my head should it decide to stand. It looked at me the whole time and slowly dragged the meat over to itself. Its eyes reflected no light, and I couldn't make out any facial characteristics except a mouth too wide for its head, filled with canines. It brought the steak to its mouth, and with a sickening crunch ripped the piece off. I didn't see much after that. I guess I had been standing and slowly backing away because the next clear thought I had was sprinting back to the house where I bolted the door and loaded my shotgun. I sat up all night, my head swimming with questions. Grandpa had never said anything about a creature living in the woods. But come morning, I was convinced that's why he left those eggs out every week. A few days later, when I had the nerve to step back into the forest, I went in with a pocket full of eggs and placed them in the hollow, just like he used to. I haven't seen or heard anything like that. I haven't seen or heard anything like what happened that night in 4 years. Yet once a week, every week, I make a trip into the forest and leave my offering. Yet to this day, I have not once stepped anywhere near the tree line after dark. I just wanted to share my personal encounter with what I believe to be a Bigfoot. Well, I'm a truck driver and travel all over the United States, and this encounter happened in Washington. I was there to get unloaded to pick up another load. All is normal as usual. I get to my location and get unloaded, and I'm racing against time to my pickup. Somehow, I make it on time and get loaded and leave, and race once more to get somewhere where I could park for my 10-hour break. I didn't win this race, so I had to pull over to a spot on the side of the road that barely could take the truck and trailer. So I settle in to get my things, and I want to get some fresh air before I lay down for the night. So I get out of the truck and walk around, calling myself, getting familiar with the area. It's late afternoon and really nice outside. There's apples and birds everywhere. The location I was in was a 2-lane road along the side of a mountain. There was a river below, and it was just beautiful. Wine country was all over the place too. So, I stayed out until dark, and finally traffic did not exist, and the noise was gone, and I thought I might sleep outside here. Then I hear little pings like pebbles are being thrown at my truck and trailer. I scan around but saw nothing. Using the full moon for light, seeing nothing there, I get uneasy and decide to go into the truck. Now, I start to hear more bings and weird-ass shrill and squawks like nothing I've ever heard before. At this point, this loud crashing noise seemed to come from nowhere. It sounded like trees snapping. Then I see a tree limb about 15 inches round go flying by my windshield. So I jump up because I genuinely believe someone crashed or something. When I get up, I make my way to the front and look out the driver's side window. Through the window, it stood and stared at me. This thing had reddish fur and massively wide frame, similar to a bodybuilder's. Standing right there in front of me was something I couldn't fathom. I began to feel freaked out, thinking, what the heck is this thing? It stepped closer to the driver's side door, and it bent down looking at me, eye to eye. I was overcome with fear, because I was thinking in my mind, this thing had to be at least 8 or even 10 feet tall. The head alone was massive and long. The face was wrinkled and leathery, and his teeth were like big yellow blocks. I just sat there and stared as it stared back at me. It had copper-color eyes that I'll never forget. Then, suddenly, it stood back upright. Again, its chest was level with the window. It towered over the door and started banging on the truck. It was pounding the roof of the truck, so I opened the door, and it backs away slowly and snorts loud and long. I somehow wasn't scared anymore. So I get out, and what a mistake this was. I have never, ever seen anything this big. It's like Shaq looking at Gary Coleman. Anyway, it rushes forward in a 2-step stride, and is on top of me before I can even move. You wouldn't think something this size could move that fast. Then, it just bent down. It seemingly smiled at me, grabbed me by my hair, not rough, but firm, and then it seemingly just let go. It smelled his hand, turned and walked away about 15 feet. It looked back at me for a second, and then started running back into the trees. This is the weirdest experience that I cannot explain. But I do sincerely think that I encountered a Sasquatch that day. This thing was seen by me and my friend on 2 separate occasions. I will explain the first encounter. It is a decently long one, but bear with me. My older brother, 2 friends, and I decided we were brave and ventured into my pasture. Now, I'm not in a rural area where my neighbors are super far away. I'm actually only about 20 minutes from town. Well, the oldest in our group was 12. So being dumb, we walked out into the field. Keep in mind, it was firstly diced and plowed, so there were no weeds. We were armed with a pocket knife, a big knife, and a CO2 airsoft gun. We walked out of my back gate and into the field. We saw nothing but the buildings maybe a mile in front of us. We also have coyotes out there. Well, we made it to the back of the field. A horrible smell came out of the ditch, and it kind of freaked us out, so we started to move back. When we turned back to the field, we saw two figures. I know for sure they were not there 25 minutes ago. Stupidly, we shot the gun at them. They stood up on two legs. We panicked and we just ran inside to watch a movie and to try to forget about this. The second time is very quick. I was playing basketball late at night and I saw this thing jump from a tree. I was older. It was 2 years from that last sighting, and I was strangely not scared. I just went back into the house and went to bed. That is my story of the strange creature I saw those nights. If you know what it is, please tell me. Well, I was 11 at the time, and my mom had a new boyfriend. He happened to own a piece of land which we lived on the edge of the woods. My brother and I, who was 12 at the time, got into another fight, and when my mom took his side, I stormed out. I was angry that my mom always took his side, and since walking around the yard was the only way I knew how to let off my anger, that's what I did. Well, since I had just stormed out instead of thinking it out first, I didn't have any of the animals with me. I walked towards the wooded part of the yard. I kept looking behind me to make sure my brother didn't follow me to annoy me. It is important to keep in mind that the edge of the property is marked by the train tracks, which no one usually goes past. I was also a very smart kid that believed in the paranormal. I was passing back and forth when I heard my brother's voice. I froze for a second to think about what it could be and what I should do. I decided, whether it was my brother or not, it didn't matter much, but the smarter option was to run to the house, and if my brother was there, that what I heard was, in fact, something trying to hurt me. And if he wasn't there, I would know that he was just following me again. I ran fast. I have only ever ran that fast once, and that was because of a different supernatural problem I had. I made it up to the back porch and turned around, and nothing was there. Whatever it was had stopped at the tree line, which had to be at least 1/4 of a football field away. Running inside, my brother was talking to my mom at the kitchen table. I asked both of them if he went outside, and their answer made my heart race and my stomach turn no. I just walked to my room and tried to calm down. Half a year passes and I had forgotten about the whole situation. Until, that is, we started finding bones in the yard. That's not what bothered me though, because coyotes were definitely common in the area. But one day, me and my mom were walking in the yard and our dog Coda started sniffing at a pile of leaves. It turned out to be a deer leg, not bones, but its entire leg. I felt sick. It looked as if somebody had ripped it off the poor animal and left it there. It's been a while, but I'm still living in that house. And lately, I've been feeling... I live in the very coast of Mississippi. There are plenty of woods and forest. There is also a history of supernatural, witchcraft, being only an hour from New Orleans, and plenty of Native American history, which I partake in. Behind my house is a small plot of conservation land that continues on the other side of my house for about a mile wide and a few long. The conservation is for Native American burial sites, or that's what the speculation is. There are some evidence of graves though, and a wildlife conservation. All of our neighbors have a fence protecting us from whatever is in the woods. I didn't really think much of it because we are in the South, and foxes are prevalent. We have a coop of chickens about 500 feet from the forest line that is fenced in. About a month of living there, chickens began to be found dead. Not all of them were really eaten, as much as shredded. We have had a couple of calls from people in charge of the conservation site to let us know that there were sightings of large animals, probably large foxes as they said. But I never really thought much of it because these things do happen. However, one night I woke up at about 3 or 4 a.m. and went to the kitchen to get a drink. Our kitchen has a sliding glass door leading to a porch area that overlooks our backyard, the forest line, in the chicken coop. I used my flashlight to get to the kitchen, because I didn't want to wake anyone up in the house. As I walked by the sliding glass door, the light caught the reflection in the door, but also 2 yellowish dots. They looked pretty small, so I figured it was probably the fox trying to get to our chickens. Foxes are typically pretty skittish and are easily startled, so I decided to bang on the glass door, scared off. I banged on the glass door and the eyes stopped moving to the chicken coop and just froze. I didn't figure much and banged on the glass again. I figured it would run after that, but to begin inching closer. Not towards the chicken coop, but towards my house. It ducked behind our shed, and the shed porch light gave me a glimpse, and I freaked out. This thing was not a fox. It was double the size and was walking really hunched over on his back legs. I grabbed the 2x4 we used to secure the sliding glass door during storms and sprinted to my room. Never really told anyone because I figured they'd think I was crazy, delusional, and that it was just one of our foxes. With all the sightings of very large foxes, I wonder if it's really even a fox anymore. To begin with, I live in Jackson, Missouri, out in the middle of nowhere. This story, I swear, is true, and it is the most scared I've ever been in my entire life. Okay, so this happened in 2014, and I would have been 14 at the time, and it was in the middle of summer, and it was about probably 11 o'clock at night. My mom came into the living room and asked if I wanted to ride with her out to the water district to pay our water bill. I love night drives, so of course I told her I'd go. We headed out to the water tower, and it was pitch black except for the shining of the moon on the road. My mom, my sister, and I were talking and having fun until we got to the water tower. I'm a big baby when it comes to the dark. I'm terrified of the dark, especially where I live. We arrived at the water tower, and I opened the door, and I heard weird sounds coming from the water tower. I told my mom, but she thought I was just kidding or getting too scared. I stepped out of the truck and walked to the door and slid the envelope into the door. I ran back to the truck as fast as I could and slammed the door. My mom laughed at me and she backed out of the driveway of the water district. We were turning onto the highway and all of a sudden, a huge creature flew out in front of our truck. This thing was like 8 feet tall and had a wingspan of 10 feet. It was a gray color and had the body of a man. It looked like it flew down from the water tower. It definitely came down from a height. It flew slow and close to the ground. It seemed like time slowed down and the world stopped for a couple of minutes while we stared at this creature. My mom and I screamed and my mom floored it out of there. She had me looking behind us to make sure it wasn't following us home. We were in shock, and my sister didn't see it because she was on her phone, but she heard us screaming. We finally made it home and I ran inside. I didn't sleep that night, and I was trying really hard. Still terrified of the water tower, and I would never go back out there at night. I found out that a conservation area is out there, and is probably where the creature lives. About a year ago, an episode of Monsters and Mysteries in America came on, and it was about flying humanoids. I automatically started crying again, and I ran to tell my mom about it. The sighting was in the Ozarks in Missouri, and for those who don't know, the Ozarks are about 4 hours away from where I live. The men in the show described exactly what we saw. The gray color of the man, the height of the creature and the wingspan, the flying in front of their car, and coming from a height. Not many people believe us, but that's fine. I know what I saw, and I don't need anybody else to tell me that. For as long as I can remember, I've always heard of the creature called Sasquatch inhabiting the woods of southern Illinois. Ever since I was a child, when I heard that every generation of my family since we immigrated to southern Illinois from Germany in 1840 have had encounters with Sasquatch, I started to spend a lot of time in the woods. Now bear in mind, leading up to this encounter, I'd always heard that Sasquatch had been known to be aggressive with humans. But, like most people, I thought it would never happen to me. Little did I know, I would never be more wrong when it came to Sasquatch. On a night in April of 2017, everything would change. My outlook on these creatures of the forest would change forever. Leading up to the encounter, I had been hearing sounds coming from a patch of woods that were off of my family's property, maybe for a little over 3 weeks. They were whoops, screams, howls, the usual Bigfoot signs. So one night, it was a full moon, and I decided to go in one night while the getting was good and try to get the creatures on audio and video. So, I let the necessary parties know where I was going to be. I got my camera and digital recorder, loaded up in my truck, and I drove down to the woods, where we'd been hearing the sounds come from. I walked in on foot from the main road with my gear, and I found a tree structure and started to record it with my camera. I was hearing movement around me the whole time. My light was on the structure, so I continued on my walk. I was in the meadow that was bordered by trees, creeks, and on both sides. I came across this one creek, and I came up on the other side, and I sat down on a log to rest my back and my legs. I turned on my audio recorder to make note of what I had seen and heard through the night. Then, I reached in my back pocket and pulled out a can of tobacco and took a pinch of it, put it in my lip, and put the can back in my pocket. When I popped the lid back on, it made a really solid sounding pop, like a tree knock. About 10 seconds later, I started hearing chatter all around me at whisper level. Real quiet, but still distinct enough that you could hear speech. So I sat there and I listened to these 2 or 3 individual creatures talking back and forth up the hill behind me, up in the trees. I was so mesmerized by listening to them that I forgot to kick my recorder back on. And this went on for about a minute. If these creatures were going back and forth like that, it kind of sounded like children talking, but it wasn't English. I don't know what language or what it could be. Then, I heard a big tree come crashing through the canopy across the creek about 100 yards away, and I heard something cannonball the creek and come up the bank. Up out the creek came a very large Sasquatch, from what I could see in the moonlight. The creature was running across the meadow towards me where I was. So, I got out of there as fast as I could. I got on the phone and called in my backup and told them it was a code black, which means aggressive individual. I made it to the main road, and there was a stone culvert underneath the road. So, I got in, deep enough where I would be out of reach of the creature. I shined my light out the one end and into the woods, and I saw the creature come to the edge of the woods that I had run out of. It stood there and watched me. Then I could see the headlights coming over the hill and across the woods. I was in the car, and a car horn going off. That's when the creature turned and walked back into the woods. I didn't realize it until I had got back to my truck after my team members dropped me off at it, but I ran out of the woods without my video camera and little tripod. I've been back to that area many times and still haven't been able to find my camera to this day. Word to the wise from this encounter: expect the unexpected. Don't think that just because it's only happened in a country on the other side of the world, that doesn't mean it can happen to you. Sasquatch are unpredictable and are more intelligent than we give them. Well, I was 11 at the time, and my mom had a new boyfriend. He happened on a piece of land which we lived on the edge of the woods. My brother and I, who was 12 at the time, got into another fight, and when my mom took his side, I stormed out. I was angry that my mom always took his side, and since walking around the yard was the only way I knew how to let off my anger, that's what I did. Well, since I had just stormed out instead of thinking it out first, I didn't have any of the animals with me. I walked towards the wooded part of the yard. I kept looking behind me to make sure my brother didn't follow me to annoy me. It is important to keep in mind that the edge of the property is marked by the train tracks, which no one usually goes past. I was also a very smart kid that believed in the paranormal. I was passing back and forth when I heard my brother's voice. I froze for a second to think about what it could be and what I should do. I decided, whether it was my brother or not, it didn't matter much, but the smarter option was to run to the house, and if my brother was there, that what I heard was, in fact, something trying to hurt me. And if he wasn't there, I would know that he was just following me again. I ran fast. I have only ever ran that fast once, and that was because of a different supernatural problem I had. I made it up to the back porch and turned around, and nothing was there. Whatever it was had stopped at the tree line, which had to be at least 1/4 of a football field away. Running inside, my brother was talking to my mom at the kitchen table. I asked both of them if he went outside, and their answer made my heart race and my stomach turn no. I just walked to my room and tried to calm down. Half a year passes and I had forgotten about the whole situation, until, that is, we started finding bones in the yard. That's not what bothered me though, because coyotes were definitely common in the area. But one day, me and my mom were walking in the yard and our dog Coda started sniffing at a pile of leaves. It turned out to be a deer leg, not bones, but its entire leg. I felt sick. It looked as if someone just ripped it off the poor animal and left it there. It's been a while, but I'm still living in that house. And lately, I've been feeling watched from those woods, and quite frankly, I'm scared of what's out there.